The notification from HR popped up on my screen, and I could barely contain my smile. After 6 years of grinding, staying late, and being everyone's go-to problem solver, I'd finally landed the senior manager position. My first thought wasn't about celebrating. It was about how I could break the news to my family without them turning it into another drama. My name is Laura, and I'm the human glue holding the Evans family together, or their personal servant, depending on how you look at it. Laura! My mother's shrill voice pierced through my bedroom wall. The washing machine is making that noise again. I minimized the congratulatory email and sighed. Coming, Mom. The washing machine wasn't actually broken. She just hadn't bothered to learn how to use it properly. Just like she hadn't bothered to learn how to use the dishwasher, the coffee maker, or basically anything else in the house that required reading instructions. Oh, good, you're here, she said as I walked into the laundry room. While you're at it, could you do Randy's shirts too? He has that important presentation tomorrow. Randy, my 32-year-old brother who somehow never learned to do his own laundry. Mom, I have work to finish. It'll only take a minute. You know how important this is for him. Everything was always important for Randy, or essential for Natasha, or crucial for Dad's image at the country club. But my things? They were always just inconveniences. I fixed the washing machine settings and headed back to my room, only to find 3 texts from Natasha asking me to proofread her college essay. Again. The same essay I'd already reviewed twice this week. My phone buzzed with a call from Kayla, my best friend and the only person who truly understood my situation. Please tell me you got it, she said before I could even say hello. I did. Girl, I can hear you not celebrating. What's wrong? I closed my bedroom door and lowered my voice. I'm looking at apartments. Finally, where? Downtown, near the office. There's this gorgeous 1-bedroom with a balcony and... A knock at my door cut me off. Laura? It was Dad. The printer's not working, and I need these contracts for tomorrow. I covered the phone. Did you check if it's out of paper? Just come fix it, please. You know I'm not good with these things. Kayla was still on the line. Girl, I heard that. You need to tell them. Today. She was right. I'd been putting it off for weeks, knowing exactly how they'd react. But with the promotion now official, I couldn't delay any longer. Family meeting, I called out after dinner, my heart pounding as they gathered in the living room. Mom was scrolling through her phone, Dad was half listening while reviewing his golf schedule, Natasha was texting, and Randy was the only one actually looking at me. I got promoted today, I started, to senior manager. That's nice, dear, Mom said, not looking up from her phone. And I'm moving out next month. The phone's lowered. 4 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Moving out? Mom's voice cracked. But why would you want to do that? Because I'm 29, Mom. I need my own space. Space? Dad scoffed. You have plenty of space here. This is about money, isn't it? We can discuss reducing your rent. It's not about money, Dad. I just need to live my own life. Randy leaned forward. Come on, sis. You know we need you here. Who's going to help Mom with everything? Maybe you could all learn to help yourselves? The words came out sharper than I intended. I can't believe how selfish you're being, Natasha chimed in. After everything this family's done for you, done for me? I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I stood up. My mind's made up. I'm moving out next month. I retreated to my room, hands shaking as I opened my laptop. A notification popped up. Natasha had tagged me in a social media post. My stomach dropped as I read it. Some people forget where they came from. Some people think they're too good for family. Guess blood isn't always thicker than water. Disappointed family betrayal. Comments were already flowing in. Mom had shared it. Dad had commented. Even Randy, who I thought might understand, had added his own passive-aggressive response. My phone buzzed again. Kayla calling. But I couldn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the screen, reading comment after comment, each one twisting the knife deeper. They wanted to talk about betrayal, about disappointment. My cursor hovered over the comment box as memories of that night 6 years ago flooded back. The night I took the fall for Randy's mistake. The night that changed everything. The secret I'd kept all these years. Maybe it was time they learned what real betrayal felt like. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Kayla had called 6 times, but I couldn't talk to anyone right now. I was too busy scrolling through the comments on Natasha's post, each one more infuriating than the last. Can't believe she'd do this to her own family. Some people just don't appreciate what they have. What kind of daughter abandons her parents? The bedroom door creaked open. Randy stood there looking apologetic. Hey sis, can we talk? About what? Your comment about how I'm throwing away years of family loyalty? I turned my laptop screen toward him. Or maybe Mom's post about her ungrateful daughter? He sat on the edge of my bed. Look, you know how they are. They're just shocked. Shocked? I laughed bitterly. They're shocked that their personal assistant wants a life of her own? That's not fair. Not fair? I pulled up the family calendar on my phone. Last week alone, I drove Natasha to 3 different college interviews, fixed Dad's presentation, organized Mom's charity event, and did your laundry twice. Tell me, Randy, when was the last time you did anything for this family except take? His face reddened. You know I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. No, you're worse. At least that person was honest about who he was. My phone buzzed again. Kayla. This time I answered, putting it on speaker just to make Randy uncomfortable. Girl, what the hell is happening? Kayla's voice filled the room. Your family's going full nuclear on social media. They're showing their true colors. That's what's happening. I kept my eyes on Randy. Apparently, I'm selfish for wanting my own life. Laura, Randy started, but I cut him off. Remember that night 6 years ago, Randy? Remember what real selfishness looks like? He stood up so fast he knocked over my desk lamp. Don't, you promised. Kayla's voice crackled through the speaker. What night? What's he talking about? Nothing, Randy said quickly. Laura, can we talk about this privately? I ended the call with Kayla. Why? Worried about your perfect image? The reformed golden boy who can do no wrong? You're angry, I get it. But don't do something you'll regret. My laptop dinged with another notification. Mom had shared yet another post. A mother's heart breaks when her children choose selfishness over family. Praying for my daughter. Too late, I muttered, opening my own social media account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Randy grabbed my wrist. Laura, please, I'm begging you. I yanked my hand away. Get out. Look, I'll talk to them. I'll make them take down the posts. Just don't do this. A knock at the door interrupted us. Natasha barged in, waving her phone. Mom's crying because of you. Are you happy now? Oh, I'm about to be, I said, turning back to my laptop. What's that supposed to mean? Natasha looked between Randy and me. What's going on? Randy's voice was desperate. Nothing. Laura's just upset. Upset? I stood up. You want to see upset? Wait until everyone knows what really happened that night. Wait until they know who really... Enough! Randy's shout made both Natasha and me jump. He rarely raised his voice anymore. Please, Laura, I'll do anything. Just don't. Natasha crossed her arms. Don't what? What are you two talking about? My phone buzzed with a text from Kayla. Whatever you're thinking of doing, sleep on it first. Trust me. I looked at Randy's pleading face, at Natasha's confusion, at the stream of notifications still popping up on my screen. The secret I'd kept for 6 years burned in my throat, begging to be released. Get out, I said again, quieter this time. Both of you. After they left, I opened my laptop again. My hands were shaking as I began to type. Funny how some people can reinvent themselves when others carry their secrets. Maybe it's time for some truth. Family secrets. I hit post before I could change my mind. Within minutes, the questions started rolling in. Old friends from high school, neighbors, even Dad's golf buddies. Everyone wanted to know what I meant. Randy called 3 times. I ignored him. Mom sent a series of increasingly panicked texts. I ignored those too. Natasha pounded on my door until Dad made her stop. Around midnight, Kayla texted again. Whatever happened 6 years ago, is revenge worth destroying your family over? I stared at her message for a long time. Was it worth it? They'd already shown they were willing to publicly shame me for wanting independence. Why shouldn't I return the favor? My phone lit up with another notification. Randy had posted a response to my cryptic message. Some secrets protect more than just one person. Please remember that, sis. Family first. I scoffed. Now he wanted to talk about family first? Opening my laptop again, I started typing the story I'd kept buried for 6 years. It was time everyone knew the truth about perfect, reformed Randy. The cursor blinked accusingly as I stared at the empty text box. 6 years of silence pressed against my chest. but the memory of that night remained crystal clear. My phone rang. Kayla again. This time I answered. "Before you do anything crazy," she said, "I'm coming over." "It's midnight." "Exactly. You're about to nuke your family at midnight. You need intervention." 20 minutes later, we sat on my bedroom floor, sharing a pint of ice cream like we used to in college. The house had gone quiet, but I could hear Randy pacing in his room next door. "Tell me what happened 6 years ago," Kayla said, passing me the spoon. I took a deep breath. "Remember that break-in at the community center? The one that made the local news? When someone stole all that equipment and crashed the van? Yeah, that was huge." "It wasn't some random burglar. It was Randy." Kayla's spoon clattered to the floor. "What?" "He was high that night. Decided it would be fun to borrow their van for a joyride. Ended up crashing it into a ditch." "But you—" Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, you took the blame." I nodded. "I found him stumbling home, covered in cuts and bruises. He was crying, saying he couldn't go to jail, couldn't ruin his future." I laughed bitterly. "He had a scholarship interview the next week." "So you just confessed to a crime you didn't commit?" "Mom and Dad convinced me. Said it would look better if I did it. First offense, good student, active in community service. They promised Randy would get help, would turn his life around." A soft knock interrupted us. "Laura?" It was Randy. "Please, can we talk?" I looked at Kayla, who nodded. "Let him in." Randy entered, looking as haunted as he had that night 6 years ago. "I saw you had company," he said, nodding at Kayla. "I can come back?" "She knows," I said. "I just told her." He sank into my desk chair. "Are you going to tell everyone else too?" "Give me one reason why I shouldn't." "Because I'm not that person anymore. You know that. The rehab program, the volunteer work, my job helping at-risk youth. It's all real. Yeah, built on a lie. Built on my sacrifice. A sacrifice I think about every single day." His voice cracked. "Why do you think I started working with troubled kids? Why do you think I spend every weekend at that same community center trying to make up for what I did?" Kayla spoke up. "Wait, you volunteer at the place you robbed?" "Every Saturday for the past 5 years. I answered for him. The perfect redemption story. Everyone loves Randy, the reformed bad boy who found his calling helping kids. "While you got labeled the problem child," Kayla said quietly. Randy stood up suddenly. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see how Mom and Dad still treat you differently? Why do you think I never moved out? I stayed to try to protect you, to take care of things so you wouldn't have to." I snorted. "Really? Is that why I still do your laundry?" "I ask Mom to ask you because it's the only way she'll leave you alone for an hour. Every time I try to do things myself, she sends you to help anyway." That made me pause. It was true. Mom never let me rest when Randy tried to handle things himself. "Look," he continued, "what I did was unforgivable. Not just the crime, but letting you take the fall. I was a coward. But these past 6 years, I've tried to become someone worthy of your sacrifice. By letting them shame me on social media, I'll make them take it all down. I'll tell them I'm moving out too, that they need to learn to stand on their own feet. Just, please don't destroy everything we've both worked for." Kayla touched my arm. "He has a point. You took the blame so he could help people. If this comes out now, all those kids he works with..." My laptop dinged. Another notification. Mom had posted again. "Sometimes the hardest thing is watching your children make mistakes." Praying for guidance. Randy reached for my laptop. "May I?" I nodded. He typed quickly, then turned the screen so I could see his response. "The biggest mistake is taking family for granted. Laura deserves better," taking down my previous comments and apologizing to my sister. "Sorry, Laura." Within minutes, his phone started blowing up with messages from our parents. He ignored them all. "I can't promise this makes everything okay," I said. "I know." He headed for the door, then turned back. "But I can promise I won't let them treat you like this anymore. You deserve your own life, Laura. You've earned it more than anyone." After he left, Kayla picked up her spoon again. "So, what are you going to do?" I closed my laptop, the half-written exposé still unsaved. "I'm going to bed. And tomorrow, I'm going apartment hunting." "And the secret?" I stared at the wall separating my room from Randy's. hearing him argue with our parents down the hall. Some secrets protect more than just one person, I quoted his post. Maybe it's time to protect myself instead. The real estate agent's heels clicked against the hardwood floors of what could be my new apartment. As you can see, the natural light is amazing, she said, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was already imagining my furniture in here when my phone buzzed. Natasha had tagged me in another post. Some family secrets should stay buried. Just saying. Family drama. Is everything okay? The agent asked, noticing my expression. Fine. I forced a smile. The apartment is perfect. When can I sign? An hour later, I sat in my car, staring at the signed lease agreement. Freedom was officially 30 days away. My phone had been buzzing nonstop, mostly messages from Mom about how I was breaking her heart, but one caught my eye. A comment from Tommy, Randy's old best friend from high school. Interesting post about family secrets, Laura. Remember that night 6 years ago? Maybe we should talk. My hands started shaking. Tommy had been there that night. He'd been in the van with Randy. Before I could respond, another message popped up. This one from Kayla. Emergency wine needed. Coming over after work. I drove home to find the house unusually quiet. A note on the fridge read, Emergency board meeting at the country club. Leftovers in the fridge. Mom. Randy was sitting at the kitchen table staring at his phone. Tommy's been messaging me, he said without looking up. Me too. He's threatening to tell people what really happened. I grabbed a wine glass from the cabinet. Maybe we should let him. Laura, I'm tired, Randy. Tired of carrying this. Tired of being the family disappointment because I took the fall for you. I know. He finally looked up. But Tommy doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't know about the kids in the van. The glass nearly slipped from my hand. We never talked about that part, how the van had been prepped for a field trip the next day, how close Randy had come to destroying not just his life, but the lives of innocent children. The doorbell rang, Kayla holding 2 bottles of wine. She read the tension in the room immediately. What did I miss? Tommy's surfaced, I said, grabbing another glass. The guy who was with Randy that night? Randy stood up. I should go. I have a meeting with my kids' group tomorrow anyway. Running away again? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He turned, face flushed. No, I'm going to call Tommy, try to reason with him. After he left, Kayla and I settled on the couch with our wine. Your sister's post about buried secrets was interesting timing, she said. Natasha doesn't know anything. She's just trying to stir drama. My phone buzzed again. Tommy. Remember how scared those kids looked the next day at the community center? Bet their parents would love to know how close their children came to disaster. He's bluffing, Kayla said, reading over my shoulder. He was just as guilty. But he has nothing to lose. His life is already a mess. The front door opened, Natasha, home early from her study group. She froze when she saw us. Oh, you're here. I live here for now. She hovered uncertainly. About my post. Save it. No, listen. I heard Randy talking to Tommy on the phone. Something about a van and kids. What really happened 6 years ago, Laura? I took a long sip of wine. Ask your brother. I'm asking you. She sat down across from us. Everyone thinks you crashed that van, but it was Randy, wasn't it? That's the secret? Before I could respond, my phone lit up with a new notification. Tommy had posted some interesting stories about that community center break-in from 6 years ago. Wonder if those kids' parents know how close their children came to riding in a van with cut brake lines? What is he talking about? Natasha grabbed her own phone. What kids? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type a response. Tommy, call me. Now. Cut brake lines? Kayla whispered. You never mentioned that. Because it wasn't true, I said. The van crashed because Randy was high. Tommy's making things up. My phone rang. Randy. Are you seeing this? His voice was panicked. He's saying I cut the brake lines on purpose. Laura, you have to help me. No one will believe me if I deny it. I looked at Natasha, who was scrolling through the growing comments on Tommy's post. At Kayla, who seemed unsure whether to believe Tommy's version or mine. Laura? Randy's voice cracked. Please, everything I've built, all those kids I help now, it'll all be destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Once again, Randy was begging for my help, asking me to protect him from his past. But this time, the stakes were even higher. Tommy posted again. Lots of questions coming in. Maybe it's time for the full story. One should truth coming. I had a choice to make. Let Tommy destroy Randy with lies, or finally tell the truth myself. Everyone in the living room, now. I hung up on Randy and texted Mom and Dad the same message. This had to end tonight. Within 15 minutes, they all filed in. Mom and Dad still in their country club attire, Randy looking pale, Natasha clutching her phone. Kayla started to leave, but I grabbed her arm. Stay. I need a witness who isn't family. Laura? Mom started. What is this about? We were in the middle of... Tommy's threatening to tell everyone Randy cut the brake lines on that van, I interrupted. He's lying, but he's also ready to tell everyone who really crashed it. Dad stood up so fast his golf cap fell off. We agreed never to discuss this. No, you ordered me never to discuss it. But now Tommy's spinning his own version, and it's worse than the truth. Randy's phone kept buzzing. He showed me the screen. Dozens of messages from kids he counseled, asking if the rumors were true. Tell them, Randy, I said. Tell them what really happened that night. He looked at our parents, then back at me. I was high. Tommy and I took the van for a joyride. I crashed it because I was too wasted to drive straight. And, I pressed. And Laura took the blame because I had a scholarship interview. Because I promised to get clean. His voice cracked. Because everyone thought she was the troublemaker anyway. Mom sank into her chair. We did what was best for the family. Best for Randy, I corrected, while I got labeled the black sheep, the problem child, the one who needed supervision and couldn't be trusted to live alone. But you were strong enough to handle it, Dad said. Randy wasn't. That's not an excuse, Natasha suddenly burst out. Do you know how messed up that is? You sacrificed one child to save another? Mom turned on her. You don't understand. Randy had potential. And Laura didn't, Kayla cut in. She just made senior manager at 29. What could she have achieved without a criminal record hanging over her? My phone buzzed again. Tommy, ready to tell everyone the truth about their precious youth counselor? I showed the message to Randy. Your call. We either tell the real story or we let Tommy tell his version. Randy stood up, hands shaking as he opened his social media app. I'll do it. Son, think about this, Dad warned. I have. Randy started typing. 6 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I was high, I stole a van, I crashed it. My sister Laura took the blame to protect me. She carried that burden while I got clean and built a new life. But I can't let her carry it anymore. Randy, stop. Mom tried to grab his phone. No, Mom. Laura's right. The truth needs to come out. He hit post. The response was immediate. Notifications flooded in. Some expressing shock, others support, many anger. The community center board will see this, Dad said. Your job is working with at-risk youth, Randy finished, teaching them that actions have consequences, that the truth matters. What kind of counselor would I be if I kept hiding behind my sister's sacrifice? My phone lit up with a call from Tommy. I answered on speaker. Saw Randy's post, he said. Brave move, but he left out the part about... There is no other part, I cut in. The brake lines weren't cut. You know that. You were there. Silence on the line. Then, fine. But people still deserve to know what really happened. They do now. And Tommy? If you try to spread lies about brake lines or endangered kids, I have the original police report. Want to explain to everyone why you fled the scene and left Randy to crash alone? He hung up. Laura, Mom said softly, we really did think we were doing what was best. I know, but your best wasn't good enough. I pulled out my lease agreement. I'm moving out next month, and this time, no one's going to stop me. I'm moving out too, Randy said. It's time we all grew up. Natasha stood up. If everyone's making announcements, I'm transferring to the state university. It's cheaper and I can pay for it myself. No more depending on Mom and Dad's money or Laura's help. Mom started to cry. Dad just looked lost. Your father and I, we don't know how to do this without you both here. Then it's time you learned, I said, but gently this time. We can't be your crutches forever. As everyone filed out, Kayla squeezed my hand. You okay? I looked at my phone, at Randy's post with its hundreds of responses, at the truth finally set free. Yeah, for the first time in 6 years, I really am. Randy lingered in the doorway. Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for everything. Don't thank me, I said. Just live a life worth the sacrifice. He nodded, understanding at last the weight of both our burdens. His to become someone better, mine to finally let go. The community center parking lot felt smaller than I remembered. Randy's car was already there, parked next to the spot where the van had crashed 6 years ago. He stood by the entrance, surrounded by a small group of teenagers, his counseling group. Laura? One of the kids called out. Are you the sister from the post? Marcus? Randy warned, but I waved him off. Yes, that's me. The kids exchanged looks. A girl with bright blue hair stepped forward. That was brave what you did, taking the blame to protect your brother. No, I said firmly. It wasn't brave. It was enabling. Sometimes protecting people means letting them face consequences. Randy cleared his throat. That's actually why I asked Laura to come today. We're talking about accountability. I followed them inside, where more teens sat in a circle of chairs. The room smelled of coffee and teenage anxiety. On the wall hung photos of Randy with various groups, camping trips, basketball games, award ceremonies. Most of you have seen my post, Randy started, about what really happened that night. A boy in the back raised his hand. Is it true you were high? Yes. I was addicted to several substances back then. I made terrible choices. But you got better, Blue Hair said. You help us now. I got better because people held me accountable, eventually. He looked at me. Laura, would you mind sharing your perspective? Before I could answer, the door opened. A man in his 60s entered, Mr. Peterson, the center's director. The same man who'd accepted my false confession 6 years ago. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, but his expression was stern. Randy, could I speak with you and your sister privately? The teens whispered among themselves as we followed Mr. Peterson to his office. Photos of community events lined the walls, including one of me doing community service here after taking the blame for Randy. I saw your post, he said, closing the door. I always suspected there was more to that story. Randy straightened his shoulders. Sir, I understand if you need to terminate my position. Terminate you? Mr. Peterson laughed. Randy, do you know why I hired you 3 years ago? We both shook our heads. Because I saw how you kept coming back here, volunteering, working with the kids. I knew something was driving you. Now I know what. He turned to me. And you, Laura. You carried that burden all these years. Not very well, I admitted. I almost exposed him out of spite last week, but you didn't. Instead, you let him tell the truth himself. He pulled out a folder. The center's board met this morning. They want to expand our youth counseling program. Randy, they'd like you to head it up. Randy blinked. Even after, especially after, your story, both your stories, that's exactly what these kids need to hear. About mistakes, consequences, redemption, and the price of enabling versus true support. A knock at the door interrupted us. Blue Hair poked her head in. Sorry, but there's someone here asking for Laura. In the hallway stood Tommy, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Hey, he said awkwardly. Can we talk? Randy started to follow us outside, but I shook my head. This conversation was 6 years overdue. Tommy waited until we were alone in the parking lot. I was jealous, he said finally, of Randy, getting clean, helping kids, becoming someone better. While I just stayed stuck, he nodded. When I saw your post about family secrets, I thought, I don't know, that exposing him would make me feel better somehow. By making up lies about brake lines? I'm sorry, I was angry. Not just at Randy, but at myself. I was in that van too, but I ran away. Left him to crash alone. Left you to take the blame. A group of kids walked past us, heading into the center. One waved at me, Marcus from Randy's group. It's not too late, I said, to become someone better. Tommy scoffed. Easy for you to say. You're the hero of this story. No, I'm not. I enabled bad behavior by covering it up. Real heroes face the truth no matter how hard it is. I pulled out my phone, showed him the center's website. They're always looking for volunteers. You think they'd let someone like me? They let Randy do it. Talk to Mr. Peterson. Tell him the whole truth. Start there. As Tommy walked toward the entrance, Randy came out. Everything okay? Getting there. I looked at the spot where the van had crashed. You know what's weird? I've been so angry about taking the blame, I never let myself feel proud of who you became because of it. Laura. No, let me finish. What you did was wrong. What I did was wrong too, in a different way. But what you're doing now? That's right, and maybe that's what matters most. He hugged me, something we hadn't done in years. Over his shoulder, I could see Tommy talking to Mr. Peterson through the window, gesturing animatedly. Ready to head home? Randy asked. I smiled. No, ready to start packing for my new apartment. For the first time, saying those words felt like a beginning rather than an escape. Moving boxes surrounded me like cardboard sentinels as I sorted through years of accumulated memories. Kayla sat cross-legged on my bed, helping me decide what to keep and what to donate. Oh my God, she held up a photo. Your goth phase. Burn it, I laughed, but stopped when I saw the date on the back, 2 months after the van incident. My dark makeup and clothes hadn't been a phase, they'd been armor. A knock at the door made us both look up. Mom stood there, holding a stack of fresh towels. I thought you might want these for your new place. Thanks, I said, surprised. It was the first time she'd acknowledged my move without crying or guilt-tripping. She lingered, looking at the photo in Kayla's hand. I remember that year. I thought you were just rebelling. I never realized that I was drowning. She sat on the edge of my bed. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Randy's post went viral, about the choices we made, the pressure we put on you. Mom, we don't have to. Yes, we do. She picked up another photo, me at my college graduation, forcing a smile while Randy was in rehab. We failed you, not just by asking you to take the blame, but by taking you for granted ever since, making you the responsible one, the reliable one. Kayla quietly slipped out, giving us privacy. Did you know, Mom continued, that your father and I had our first real fight about dishes yesterday? In 30 years of marriage, we'd never argued about chores because I always did them. She nodded, wiping away tears. Randy's moving out next week. Did he tell you? Yeah, found a place near the community center. And Natasha's serious about transferring schools. Everyone's leaving. Not leaving, Mom. Growing up. There's a difference. A commotion downstairs interrupted us. Raised voices, something falling. We rushed down to find Dad and Randy in the kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes. I told you I'd handle the dishes, Dad was saying. And I told you you're loading the dishwasher wrong, Randy shot back. They both turned when they saw us. Laura? They said simultaneously, then stopped embarrassed. Don't look at me, I held up my hands. Figure it out yourselves. But you always, Dad started. Not anymore. I turned to head back upstairs, then paused. You know what? Watch this. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. Say cheese. Laura, we're a mess, Mom protested. Exactly. I took the picture. Dad with soap suds on his golf shirt, Randy holding a broken plate, Mom still teary-eyed, all of us looking slightly chaotic. I posted it immediately. Family isn't about perfection. It's about growth, even when it's messy. Real family. Within minutes, the likes and comments started flowing, but these were different from the angry, judgmental responses to our earlier drama. These were real, honest, understanding. Looks like my house when I moved out. Parents learning to adult is the best karma. This is what healing looks like. Natasha came home to find us all still in the kitchen, now laughing as Dad and Randy competed to see who could load the dishwasher faster. What's happening? She asked. Growth, Mom answered, surprising us all. Messy, uncomfortable growth. My phone buzzed with a message from Tommy. Started volunteering at the center today. Mr. Peterson says I have potential. Thanks for the push. I showed it to Randy, who smiled. He helped with my teen group. Kids really responded to him. Because he's real, I said. No pretense, no perfect facade. Dad straightened up from the dishwasher. Speaking of real, Laura, your mother and I have been talking. We'd like to help with your moving expenses. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. Not to control you or keep you dependent, but because we should have supported your independence years ago. And, Mom added, we'd like to start family therapy, all of us, to learn how to be better, for each other and ourselves. I looked around the kitchen, at the broken dishes, the sudsy floor, the imperfect family trying to do better. For the first time, I saw us clearly, not as victims and villains, but as flawed people learning to change. Therapy sounds good, I said, but I'm still moving out next week. We know. Mom smiled through fresh tears. And we're proud of you. Randy picked up another plate, deliberately dropped it. Oops, guess we need more practice at this adulting thing. Really? Dad exclaimed. What? Laura's not here to clean it up anymore. We better learn. I snapped another picture of their bickering, this one just for me. A reminder that sometimes the biggest messes lead to the best transformations. Upstairs, my boxes waited to be filled, but now they felt less like an escape route and more like a bridge to independence, to growth, to a new kind of family dynamic, one where we could all be perfectly imperfect together. The last box landed with a thud in my new living room. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. That's the last one, Randy said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Unless you're hiding more shoes somewhere. Hey, I helped you move yesterday. No complaining. Kayla emerged from the kitchen, already opening a bottle of champagne. Less talking, more celebrating. The doorbell rang. Mom and Dad, carrying a houseplant and looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind them, Natasha held a wrapped package. We brought you something, Mom said, thrusting the plant forward. It's a peace lily. The florist said they're good for new beginnings. And this, Natasha handed me her gift. Open it now. Inside was a framed photo. The one from the kitchen last week with all of us surrounded by broken dishes and soap suds. She'd added a caption, perfectly imperfect. For your new wall, she said, so you remember you're not actually escaping us. Speaking of not escaping, Dad cleared his throat. We had our first therapy session this morning. And? I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice. And your father cried, Mom said, earning a glare from Dad. In a good way. We talked about patterns, about enabling, about how we've treated you. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Tommy looking nervous, but clean-cut in a button-down shirt. Sorry I'm late. Had my first official counseling session with the kids today. Randy beamed. How'd it go? Amazing. Terrifying. They asked about the van incident. I told them everything. My part in it, running away, trying to cause trouble last week. They actually respected the honesty. That's what real accountability looks like, I said, remembering our conversation in the parking lot. Kayla started passing around champagne glasses. To new beginnings? Wait, Mom said. She pulled out her phone. I want to post something first. We all froze. The last time my mother posted about family matters, it had sparked a war. She showed us the screen, learning that perfect families don't exist, but perfectly imperfect ones do. Proud of all my children today. Family growth, new chapter. Mom, I started. I know, no more social media drama, but I wanted people to see the whole story, the real ending. It's not an ending, Randy said. It's just different, better. Dad picked up a box labeled kitchen. Should we help you unpack? Actually, I smiled, I think I want to do it myself. Figure out where everything goes, make it mine. Good, Mom said firmly, though her eyes were wet. That's good. We stood there awkwardly until Kayla raised her glass. To Laura's new place. And to Randy's promotion, I added. And to Tommy's fresh start, Randy chimed in. And to parents learning to load dishwashers. Natasha smirked. After they left, I sat on my new couch, surrounded by boxes and possibility. My phone buzzed with a message from Blue Hair, the girl from Randy's group. Thanks for showing us that telling the truth isn't the end of the world. I looked at the kitchen photo on my wall, at the peace lily by the window, at the keys to my very own apartment. Opening my phone, I made one final post. 6 years ago, I made a choice to protect someone else's truth. Today, I'm choosing to live my own. Not running away, not cutting ties, just growing. Sometimes the hardest part of loving your family is learning to love yourself first. My truth. New chapter. The responses came quickly. This whole story has helped me talk to my own family. From drama to growth. We love to see it. Your brother's program helped my kid. Sometimes bad choices lead to beautiful things. A knock at my door. Kayla had forgotten her jacket. She looked around at my boxes. Need help unpacking? No, I said, surprising myself. I think I want to take my time, do it my way. Look at you setting boundaries. She hugged me. I'm proud of you. You know that? After she left, I opened the box marked Memories. Inside was the old photo of my goth phase, the one Mom had seen earlier. I placed it next to the kitchen disaster photo. My phone buzzed one last time. A group text from Mom. Family dinner this Sunday? We promised to cook ourselves. It might be terrible, but it'll be our terrible. I smiled and replied, wouldn't miss it, but I'm not doing the dishes. Randy, Dad's got dishes covered. He's been watching YouTube tutorials. Natasha, this should be good. Dad, I resent these implications. Mom, no you don't, dear. See you Sunday, Laura? Looking around my new apartment, at the space that was entirely mine, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. See you Sunday, I typed. I'll bring dessert. Because sometimes moving forward means knowing exactly when to look back.
On a peaceful snowy afternoon in February, Elizabeth Anderson sat quietly knitting in her living room. The unused pale pink yarn danced gently on her swollen belly. With just a week until her due date, she was nearly finished with the tiny socks she was making for her long-awaited child. Their 5-year-old two-story house stood out even among the upscale Minneapolis suburbs. White exterior walls with deep green shutters, and a meticulously maintained front yard. Everything looked perfect, a world Elizabeth could never have imagined during her days working as a nurse. Beth, knitting again. Don't you have enough baby clothes already? At the sudden voice, Elizabeth stopped her hands. Turning around, she saw her mother-in-law Victoria standing there with a homemade apple pie. Their tradition of sharing dinner 3 times a week had continued since they moved into this house 5 years ago. Hello, Mother. But I still think we need more. Elizabeth smiled gently. Her mother-in-law was a powerful figure in local society circles, known by everyone who mattered. On the surface, she doted on her daughter-in-law and had even provided the down payment for the house. All neighborhood connections had been established through her, and weekend tea parties and charity events had somehow become obligations. Elizabeth often found herself privately uncomfortable with Victoria's occasionally overbearing attitude. James is working late again today, Victoria asked while looking out the window. Her son, a department head at a major life insurance company, was an elite earner making over $300,000 a year. Though he was known in the neighborhood as an ideal husband, work had been keeping him late recently. Especially in the past 3 months, he'd been coming home late 3 nights a week, supposedly training new employees. Yes, seems like a new project has started, Elizabeth answered vaguely. She had finally become pregnant 2 years ago after fertility treatments. As a former pediatric nurse, she understood the preciousness of life better than anyone. Her caring nature and family-first attitude had earned her the trust of those around her. However, an unspoken anxiety was growing in her heart. Her husband's recent behavior seemed somehow unsettled. Suspicious late-night phone calls. The way he hastily closed his laptop screen. And last week, the handkerchief she found by chance, carrying an unfamiliar perfume scent. Still, Elizabeth shook her head to dismiss her doubts. Perhaps she was just being oversensitive since becoming pregnant. On the living room shelf sat their wedding photo. The smiling faces of the young couple from 5 years ago. Elizabeth beaming happily in James's arms. Next to it was a family photo from last Christmas, showing the three of them together with Victoria. Everything looked perfect. Yes, perhaps it only looked that way. The baby will surely be a beautiful girl, Victoria said, as if changing the subject. Outside the window, the snow was falling more heavily. The harsh winter in the Minneapolis suburbs seemed far from over. The morning sun streamed into the maternity ward at Mayo Clinic. The view from the hospital room window was a world of silver white. The snow that had started falling last night was still quietly continuing. Minnesota winter was still in full force. Elizabeth lay in bed, cradling her newborn daughter Grace. A tiny 6-pound life. 3 days had passed since the C-section delivery, and she had finally been cleared for discharge this morning. Both mother and child were progressing well. "Good morning, Grace." The baby, wrapped in soft infant clothes, was sleeping while moving her tiny lips. Though the birth came a week earlier than expected, thankfully there were no major issues. Elizabeth's heart swelled with warmth at the prospect of their new life together. 7 a.m. The room door was knocked, and Sarah, the attending nurse, entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Anderson. Are you ready for discharge?" "Yes, almost everything's packed. Just about 30 minutes until my husband comes to pick us up." At that moment, there was some commotion in the hallway. Sarah frowned briefly and walked to the window. Looking down at the parking lot, her expression tensed. Mrs. Anderson. Could you wait a moment?" "Something." Sarah's words trailed off. Elizabeth felt anxious and tried to approach the window herself, but Sarah hurriedly raised her hand to stop her. "Please wait here while I check." After the nurse left the room, the noise in the hallway increased. Voices of other patients and nurses. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of sirens. 10 minutes later, the room door opened again. This time it was Dr. Carter, her attending physician. The usually calm doctor wore an unusually serious expression. "Mrs. Anderson, could we have a bit more time before proceeding with your discharge? Has something happened?" "Don't worry. It's just that the police." The doctor's words were drowned out by a sudden commotion in the hallway. Elizabeth quietly stood up, still holding her baby. "Did something happen to my car?" Dr. Carter didn't answer. Instead, he let out a deep sigh. "The police officers will be here to talk." At that moment, the room door burst open. 2 detectives entered. One was a gray-haired man in his 50s, the other a female detective in her early 30s. Both wore stern expressions. "Mrs. Anderson, we need to speak with you." The gray-haired detective showed his police badge. "Detective Murphy, Minneapolis Police Homicide Division." The moment she saw that title, Elizabeth's body began to tremble slightly. "We'll have a nurse take care of the baby." The female detective spoke gently but firmly. Elizabeth handed Grace to the nurse, lacking the strength to resist. "Now, let's go to the parking lot." No one spoke during the elevator ride. The first-floor lobby they emerged into was more crowded than usual. Hospital staff, police officers, and what appeared to be several reporters. All eyes were on Elizabeth. As the automatic doors opened, the freezing wind stung her cheeks. Elizabeth turned up the collar of her thin coat. Several patrol cars were parked in the lot. And in one cordoned-off area marked with yellow tape was her car. Red emergency lights cast an ominous glow on the pure white snow. The driver's side window was completely shattered. And around the car stood 6 uniformed officers. All of them watching her. "Ma'am, please stay away from the vehicle." One officer called out, but Elizabeth's feet were already moving toward the car. "Why, what happened to my—" Her words trailed off. The trunk was open. And from it came a foul odor. The young female detective quickly grabbed her arm. "Mrs. Anderson, please don't come any closer." But it was too late. Elizabeth had already seen what was in the trunk. A black plastic bag. Reddish-brown stains diluted by melting snow. And just visible from the bag, a human hand. She couldn't even scream. All strength left her body. Just before losing consciousness, one memory flashed through Elizabeth's mind. 3 nights ago. The sound of the trunk closing when her husband came home. And after his shower, that unfamiliar perfume scent. In the Minneapolis police headquarters interrogation room, Elizabeth clutched a paper cup of coffee with both hands. The coffee, which should have been warm, had gone cold. "Let me confirm once again." Detective Murphy pointed to a photograph spread on the desk. It showed a woman's body half visible from a black plastic bag. "Do you know this person?" "Amy Mitchell. A new employee at your husband's company." Elizabeth shook her head. However, there was already uncertainty in her gesture. Yes, she felt like she had seen her somewhere before. Detective Morris played surveillance camera footage. Mayo Clinic parking lot. The screen showed Elizabeth's car. And a figure moving around the car. "At this time, you should have been asleep in your hospital room." "So why was your car?" "I don't know." Elizabeth's voice trembled. The hospital's entry and exit records provided her with a perfect alibi. It was physically impossible for her to have left her room late at night after a C-section. "Then what do you make of this?" Murphy presented a printout. A threatening email received by Amy Mitchell's account. The sender was listed as Elizabeth Anderson. "Stay away from my husband. Or else." "That's not true. I never sent such an email." At Elizabeth's denial, the detectives exchanged silent glances. Outside the interrogation room, technical investigators were analyzing data from her smartphone. Then, at 10:30 a.m., everything changed. "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for your patience." A new detective entered with a USB drive. It had been found in Amy's apartment. "We found some interesting records on this USB." The screen displayed accounting records. James Anderson's name. Multiple secret accounts. And a staggering amount of debt. $5 million. Seeing that number triggered various memories in Elizabeth's mind. Her husband's late-night absences, disappearing bank balances, and the life insurance policies that had suddenly increased recently. Everything was connected, but not in the way she had hoped. "Mrs. Anderson, do you know your husband's whereabouts?" It took several seconds to understand the question's meaning. James Anderson. He was supposed to pick up his wife from the hospital this morning, but he hadn't shown up. The company couldn't reach him either. The digital forensics results are in. A technical investigator brought in a new report. The threatening email's IP address. Email client settings. Everything had been cleverly disguised. However, the data pointed to one fact. These emails were sent from your home. The air in the interrogation room felt heavy. Outside the window, snow had started falling again. Detective Morris rushed in. In her hand was a medical record. Amy Mitchell's last hospital visit. 6 months pregnant. The father's name wasn't listed, but witness testimonies all pointed in one direction. Murphy let out a deep sigh. "To be frank, we believe your husband and she were having an affair. And that relationship had broken down. Amy was threatening to go public with everything. Meanwhile, your husband had substantial debt." Elizabeth's vision swayed. Like a nightmare. But this was undeniably real. "Mrs. Anderson, how do you explain this?" Placed on the desk was an insurance policy. The beneficiary had been recently changed. From Elizabeth Anderson to Victoria Anderson. At that moment, the interrogation room door burst open. A young officer rushed in. Victoria Anderson. She had come to the police voluntarily with information. Elizabeth's mother-in-law had noticed her son's changes. Heavy gambling losses at casinos. Illegal fundraising. And relationships with multiple women. She had known everything but kept silent. However, now that silence was about to end, Detective Morris presented new evidence. Hidden camera footage found in Amy's apartment. James Anderson's figure. Planning what was meant to be a perfect crime. Just then, an officer burst in. "James Anderson has been spotted at the airport." The atmosphere in the interrogation room changed instantly. And at that moment, all the gears began turning. Toward the truth. Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Amid flying radio communications, airport police and the investigation team began moving quickly. A few passengers stood anxiously in the late-night terminal. And on a bench in front of the boarding gate sat a man. James Anderson had planned to board a flight to Dubai. His passport was forged. He carried $500,000 in cash. It seemed like a perfect escape plan. However, he had failed to account for one thing. The police had set up one final trap with Victoria's cooperation. "Mother, why?" James's expression contorted. The words that escaped his mouth at the moment of arrest hinted at the whole truth. At the same time, at Mayo Clinic, Elizabeth stood in front of the nursery, watching Grace's sleeping face. Nurse Sarah gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Babies need their mother's love. Those words slowly began to thaw her frozen heart. In the police headquarters interrogation room, James began his confession. The detectives were stunned by his shocking admission. It all began 2 years ago. Heavy gambling losses at casinos. Embezzlement. And then meeting Amy, the new employee. Affairs were routine for him. But Amy was different. She was carrying my child. A 6-month-old fetus. This coincided with the time Elizabeth was struggling with fertility treatments. The insurance fraud was planned from the beginning. Multiple life insurance policies. Changing the beneficiary. Everything was part of a plan to erase the $5 million debt. And there was another accomplice in this plan. Amy herself was an accomplice. A shocking truth revealed. Amy and James had agreed to split the insurance money. The fabricated threatening emails. Evidence carefully prepared to cast suspicion on Elizabeth. But the plan went wrong. Amy tried to break our agreement. As her pregnancy progressed, Amy's attitude changed. She began threatening to reveal everything. And demanded more money. They had their final discussion in the Mayo Clinic parking lot. She said she would ruin my life. The struggle quickly spiraled out of control. The scarf around Amy's neck. Too much force applied in an instant. And then I panicked. To dispose of the evidence, he used Elizabeth's car trunk. The hospital parking lot should have provided his wife with a perfect alibi. However, he had overlooked one thing. Mike Johnson, the hospital janitor. He had witnessed all the suspicious activity late at night. And the glove found in the camera's blind spot became crucial evidence. New evidence continued to emerge. The hidden camera found in Amy's apartment. She had installed it herself. All conversations, all plans were recorded. And among them was unexpected footage. In the footage, James was already involved with Amy. 5 years ago, behind the scenes while a happy bride smiled in her white wedding dress. Victoria Anderson's testimony was even more shocking. I knew everything. Her son's broken life. Multiple affairs. Debts. She had known it all and kept silent. Because I too was an accomplice. She had been involved in the insurance fraud plan. The change of beneficiary was proof. However, murder was not part of the plan. Later, in a room at Mayo Clinic, Elizabeth cradled her newborn daughter. I'm sorry, Grace. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of despair. They were tears for a new beginning, after knowing and accepting everything. The following year, Elizabeth Anderson bustled about in her white coat in Mayo Clinic's pediatric ward. She had returned to nursing 6 months ago. The hospital where she had given birth. The place where everything had changed. Now, she was walking a new path in life. Dr. Anderson, happy first birthday. Elizabeth smiled gently at her colleague's voice. Today was Grace's first birthday. She planned to pick her up from daycare after her shift. Thank you. Today is a special day. It meant more than just a birthday. Today, at the Hennepin County Courthouse, James Anderson's sentence would be handed down. The sentence was read solemnly. The courtroom was filled with people connected to the case. In the front row sat Amy Mitchell's parents. A year ago, they had been overwhelmed with grief and anger. But now, their expressions showed a kind of resignation. We want to do what we can for Amy. Mrs. Mitchell spoke about the scholarship fund they had established last year. It was meant to support female students facing financial hardship. Though their daughter's life was lost, they were determined not to let the tragedy be in vain. In the back seat sat Victoria Anderson. Though charged as an accomplice, she received a suspended sentence in consideration of her full cooperation with the investigation. I will spend my life making amends. Having completely withdrawn from society circles, she now volunteers supporting domestic violence victims. She was also allowed to look after Grace on weekends. My mother-in-law has truly changed. Elizabeth spoke quietly. Over the past year, she had learned that hatred produces nothing. After the sentencing, Elizabeth headed to her new home. She had moved from the previous mansion and now lived in a small house. But this house was filled with warm light. Grace, picked up from daycare, ran to her with a smile. Her steps were remarkably steady for a 1-year-old. Even the doctors were amazed at her growth. Happy birthday, my angel. In the living room, a homemade cake was ready. Candlelight gently illuminated the room. Around the cake gathered a new family. Elizabeth's parents, and surprisingly, Amy's parents had been invited too. We've agreed to be Grace's honorary grandparents, Mrs. Mitchell explained. To break the chain of hatred, the two families had chosen the path of reconciliation. And this is our new project. Elizabeth pulled out a brochure. Breaking the Silence, a new organization supporting victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. She had decided to use her experience to help others in similar situations. Our activities are already receiving significant response. The insurance industry had tightened its contract review standards in response to this case. DV hotlines were also made mandatory. The media, too, had shifted from sensational reporting to examining the core issues. At night, after putting Grace to bed, Elizabeth continued working in her home office. Various photographs adorned the walls. Christmas parties at the hospital. Support group members. And photos documenting Grace's growth. Her life was definitely moving forward. On her desk lay a diary. Dear Grace. It contained all the truth. Because someday, when her daughter grows up, there will be a day when she wants to know about this incident. But now was not yet that time. Outside the window, snow had begun falling again. But this winter was different from last year. Even in the freezing cold, there was a definite hint of spring. Elizabeth picked up a photograph from her desk. Her and Grace right after birth. A snapshot taken just before everything changed that morning. We're going to be all right, she whispered, smiling quietly. Tomorrow would begin another new day. And each day was filled with new hope. The clock showed 11 p.m. Grace's breathing could be heard from the next room. Elizabeth added one final line to her diary. To my beloved daughter. Life sometimes confronts us with cruel truths. But if you have the courage to face those truths and overcome them, a new path will surely open. You are that hope itself. The snow that had piled up in the Mayo Clinic parking lot had now completely melted. There stood families celebrating the birth of new life. Truth sometimes appears before us in its most cruel form. However, the courage to accept that truth and keep walking forward becomes the power to carve out a new life. Elizabeth Anderson's story was proof of such hope. The click of heels echoed rhythmically through the research facility's white corridor. Amy Martin was hurrying to the conference room, reviewing the final report for their new drug development project. The pearl necklace at her throat caught the fluorescent light with a subtle gleam. It was a precious gift from her mother, which she always wore during crucial moments. Good morning, Director Martin, young researchers greeted her one after another. Amy returned their greetings with a gentle smile, her eyes scanning the dimly lit laboratory. The research and development division she led was entering the final phase of an innovative cancer treatment project. Johnson, how did the culture data from last night turn out? Yes. The results exceeded our expectations. Please take a look at this. A young man in a lab coat eagerly held out his tablet. Amy studied the graphs displayed on the screen and nodded with satisfaction. The success of this project would have a significant impact on the pharmaceutical industry. Excellent. At this rate, we should be ready for next month's clinical trials. The side effect numbers are lower than anticipated too. It's all thanks to your guidance, Director Martin. The laboratory was filled with energy. In the 2 years since Amy had become division head, the team's performance had steadily improved. Her calm judgment and precise direction had earned the trust of the young researchers. Just then, her smartphone vibrated discreetly. The screen showed an incoming call from Wedding Planner. Amy hesitated for a moment before answering. Martin speaking. I apologize for calling, but regarding tomorrow's final meeting, Mrs. Carter's mother has made a special request. Amy felt a slight dizziness. The wedding preparations were also in their final stages. 2 months ago, her chance encounter with James Carter, who had visited the research facility for a real estate inspection, had dramatically changed her life. Attracted by his gentlemanly demeanor and intellectual conversation, wrapped in his polished appearance, she had decided on engagement after just 2 months. However, there was an incident that cast a dark shadow over that decision. It was the day she first met James's mother, Patricia Carter. In a private room at an upscale restaurant, Patricia, dressed in the latest Chanel suit with heavy makeup attempting to make her look younger, turned her gaze toward Amy. Oh, so you're a researcher. It's fine for women to work, I suppose, but in our family, wives are expected to tend to the home. Dressed in luxury brands and wearing heavy makeup, Patricia looked Amy up and down as if appraising her value. Her gaze clearly held contempt. Career women shouldn't have families, that's my belief. But since James chose you, I suppose I'll have to turn a blind eye to it, given the times we live in." Beside her, James merely offered an awkward smile at his mother's words, making no attempt to object. His attitude made Amy realize the reality she would have to face. Those words left a deep wound in Amy's heart. However, she maintained her composure, offering only a smile in response. "You're absolutely right, Mother. I'll do my best to be a good wife from now on." Patricia never understood the true meaning hidden behind those words. On the morning of the wedding day, Amy awoke quietly. Outside her window, Boston's cityscape gleamed in the autumn sunlight. The maple leaves were as vivid as the blush on a bride's cheeks. She sat at her dressing table and picked up her usual pearl necklace. "Are you ready?" Her mother Carol entered the room. Behind her stood her father Robert, who had become CEO of Brown Pharmaceuticals 6 months ago. His gaze held both gentle concern for his daughter and confidence in the plan about to unfold. "Yes, everything's perfect." Amy looked at her parents in the mirror and answered with certainty. Her pearl necklace gleamed in the morning light. "All according to plan." Amy nodded quietly at her father's words. The grand ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel was bathed in the soft autumn afternoon light. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, one could see the fall foliage reflected in the Charles River. More than 200 guests representing Boston's high society were elegantly seated among the European classical furnishings. Golden bubbles from the champagne tower filled glass after glass. A string quartet's live performance enhanced the elegant atmosphere. Patricia Carter sat proudly at the main table. Wearing the latest Dior dress, a large diamond necklace sparkled at her throat. Society regulars gathered around her. "My son is finally going to have a proper family," Patricia said, continuing with a refined smile. "His partner works at some research facility, I believe." "Well, I suppose that's just how times are these days." Subdued laughter rippled through the group. Patricia's expression showed satisfaction at their response. "But I'm not worried. She'll naturally quit her job after marriage, of course." At that moment, the MC stood up with microphone in hand. "Now, we'd like to hear a few words from the groom's mother." Patricia rose with a broad smile. She elegantly raised her champagne glass and surveyed the room. When her gaze turned to the main table where the bride and groom sat, Amy responded with a quiet smile. "Thank you all for joining us today to celebrate my son James's wedding," Patricia began, speaking with practiced fluency. "The Carter family has contributed to Boston's development for 3 generations. It brings me immense joy to welcome a new member into our distinguished family." Patricia paused for a moment, her expression shifting. A hint of sarcasm played at the corners of her lips. "And I have another wonderful announcement to make today." She raised her voice while looking at Amy. "We finally have a wonderful maid in our house. Please feel free to use her services." Laughter spread through the venue. The high society guests seemed to be enjoying the witty joke. Even James smiled slightly at his mother's words. But Amy's expression remained unchanged. She quietly picked up her champagne glass and raised it with grace. Her figure, wrapped in a deep blue evening gown, appeared more dignified than ever. "Oh, Amy dear, it's just a joke. Don't take it personally," Patricia said with a triumphant smile. At that moment, there was movement near the entrance. Amy's parents slowly stood up. Robert Brown's distinguished features wore a solemn expression. Carol gazed at her daughter with warm eyes. "Now, for the real surprise." Robert's voice quietly resonated through the venue. The atmosphere in the room suddenly froze. The color drained from Patricia's face. James also wore a confused expression, unable to grasp the situation. The string quartet stopped playing, and even the sound of pouring champagne ceased. The eyes of over 200 guests turned simultaneously toward Robert Brown. The presence of the CEO of Boston's leading pharmaceutical company commanded the entire room. Amy rose slowly. Her pearl necklace gleamed in the setting sun. There was no longer any hesitation in her eyes. She intended to calmly witness every moment of the real surprise about to unfold. The expensive champagne glasses on the tables trembled slightly, like harbingers of the earthquake to come. The atmosphere in the room was heavy and tense, like the stillness before a storm. Patricia looked anxiously at Robert and Carol. The champagne glass in her hand shook slightly. James glanced between his mother and his bride, seemingly unable to decide how to respond. Robert Brown slowly took the microphone. His bearing exuded the dignity of a global pharmaceutical company's leader. The atmosphere in the room maintained a delicate, precarious balance, as if made of glass. "Thank you all for joining us today at my beloved daughter Amy's wedding." With those words, a small murmur ran through the room. Patricia's face grew even paler. "Amy Martin, no, Amy Brown. She is the head of Brown Pharmaceuticals Research and Development Division, and our next vice president, taking office next month." Robert's voice grew heavier. Carol stood quietly smiling beside her husband. "And for those from Carter Real Estate, she is also your partner in a $10 billion development project." The room erupted in chaos. Boston's social elite voiced their surprise. Patricia nearly collapsed into her chair, sending a pleading look to her son James. "We've been watching, as a sort of social experiment, to see how our daughter would be treated while working under the name Martin." Robert paused briefly before continuing. "And today, it seems we have our answer." Amy rose gracefully. Her deep blue wedding dress sparkled in the twilight. Her expression no longer held false modesty. She radiated the dignified authority of a research and development division chief. "Mother-in-law," Amy's clear voice rang through the silent room. "Let me introduce myself not as your maid, but as someone who holds your company's fate in her hands." Patricia's champagne glass fell from her hand. The sound of crystal shattering on the marble floor rang sharply, as if symbolizing the shattering of her pride. This is a misunderstanding," Patricia cried out in a trembling voice. "It was meant to be a joke." Everyone was laughing. "Yes, indeed," Everyone was laughing, Amy continued calmly. And that very laughter is precisely what we found problematic. In the corner of the room, people could already be seen checking their smartphones for news. The Boston Globe had already begun reporting on the incident. All new development contracts with Carter Real Estate are cancelled as of today, Robert announced in a matter-of-fact tone. Furthermore, we will be reviewing all existing business relationships. The weight of those words took the breath from everyone in the room. Carter Real Estate executives hurriedly stood up, phones in hand. Decades of corporate relationships were crumbling audibly in this moment. Wait. Please wait. James raised his voice for the first time. His handsome features were now distorted with fear. I had nothing to do with this. Mother's behavior. You bear your share of responsibility. Amy fixed her former fiancé with a cold gaze. Why couldn't you stop your mother's discriminatory behavior then? James was left speechless at this question. His silence vividly illustrated his own indecisiveness and moral negligence. In the corners of the room, guests could already be seen preparing to leave. The rules of high society are harsh. Everyone quickly distances themselves from a family showing signs of decline. Ladies and gentlemen, Amy addressed the entire room. Today's events are not merely a personal matter. They are a warning bell against discriminatory values that still persist in modern society, and the prejudices that lurk beneath the surface of supposed ladies and gentlemen. At these words, many guests lowered their faces. The guilt of having laughed along with Patricia's joke weighed heavily on them. Carol quietly approached and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You made the right choice. Amy nodded slightly at her mother's words. Patricia had collapsed into her chair. Her heavy makeup was streaking with tears. James stood dumbfounded, unable to seek help from anyone. We'll take our leave now, Robert announced. Amy, let's go. Amy nodded quietly. She took one last look around the room. Luxurious decorations, expensive attire, refined manners. But now, the ugly reality that had lurked beneath that brilliant surface was exposed to the light of day. Mother-in-law, Amy turned back to address Patricia before leaving. I probably wouldn't have made a very good maid. But as a good executive, I'll be considering the future of your company. Those words were the final trigger. Patricia finally broke down in tears. Her appearance was now pitiable, unimaginably different from her previous haughty attitude. Amy departed the ballroom with dignified steps alongside her parents. 1 week after the wedding, morning sunlight streamed into the top-floor conference room at Brown Pharmaceuticals. As Amy quietly read the newspaper by the large windows overlooking Cambridge, her secretary hurriedly opened the door. Mrs. Carter is here. She's requesting to see you. Amy slowly put down the newspaper. Show her in. A few minutes later, Patricia Carter entered the conference room. Gone was her previous arrogance, replaced by a tired expression with minimal makeup. Though still wearing a luxury brand suit, her entire demeanor had completely changed. Amy, no, Ms. Brown, Patricia's voice trembled. Please, I beg you. No more sanctions. Sanctions? Amy responded in a calm tone. This is purely a business decision. We've determined that doing business with companies holding discriminatory values would significantly damage our brand image. But that was just a joke. In a social setting. Don't you think discrimination in social settings is even more malicious? Amy's voice took on a slight edge. How can you call humiliating someone in front of others social? Patricia lost her words and began to sink to her knees. Amy immediately raised her hand to stop her. Such actions are unnecessary. What I seek is sincere reflection and reform. At that moment, the conference room door opened again. James entered with aggressive steps. What is the meaning of this? He shouted in an agitated state. Because of you, the company, our family is falling apart. Amy fixed James with a calm gaze. Are you saying you bear no responsibility for this? James's voice trailed off. Mother's behavior was inappropriate, certainly. But our relationship. Your attitude was the biggest problem. Amy slowly stood up. Turning a blind eye to discrimination is the same as participating in it. The atmosphere in the conference room grew heavier. Outside the window, researchers in white coats could be seen busily going about their work. I'll present our specific conditions. Amy looked down at the documents on her desk. First, the complete resignation of Carter Real Estate's management team. Second, implementation of an anti-discrimination program within the company. Third, active promotion of women to management positions. That's. James choked on his words. Then our family. Your position is included, of course. Amy's voice was cold. We cannot entrust a company to executives who silently condone discrimination. Patricia clung to her son's arm. Her appearance was now unimaginably weak compared to her previous haughty attitude. As compensation, we also demand a donation of 30% of your personal assets to a fund supporting women's advancement in society. 30%. Patricia let out a cry. But our lifestyle. There's no need for concern. Amy's tone carried a hint of irony. I'm sure someone will hire you as a maid. At these words, Patricia's face turned blue. Her own words had come back to haunt her. I expect your answer within 3 days, Amy stated calmly. After that, we will immediately halt all transactions and pursue legal action. James started to say something but ultimately swallowed his words. His gentlemanly facade had completely crumbled. You know the way out. Amy pressed the button to call her secretary. This is your last chance. Make a wise decision. After Patricia and James left the conference room, Amy stood by the window again. She could see female researchers in white coats working energetically. Just then, a message arrived from her father Robert. The board unanimously supports your decision. Amy smiled slightly. This wasn't personal revenge. It was a necessary corrective measure against long-standing unjust discrimination. A few days later, the Carter family's response arrived. It was complete surrender. The Boston Globe's social pages carried new headlines. Carter Real Estate announces major reforms. Reflection on gender discrimination, concrete measures announced. Patricia Carter donates personal fortune to Women's Support Fund. Amy looked down at the evening cityscape of Boston from the top floor window. The sunset reflecting on the Charles River seemed to herald the dawn of a new era. That night, Amy had a long overdue phone conversation with her mother Carol. "Any regrets?" Her mother's voice carried a hint of worry. "None," Amy answered with conviction. This was a necessary change. Not just for me personally, but for all women. After hanging up, Amy reviewed the documents on her desk. It was a proposal for a new research and development project. The names of many female researchers were listed there. 1 year later, in autumn, an important announcement was about to be made in Brown Pharmaceuticals' boardroom. The windows offered a panoramic view of Cambridge's fall foliage. Amy Brown calmly reviewed her materials. The new drug trials have reached their final stage, with results exceeding expectations. Amy's voice resonated with the board members gathered in the room. The market size is estimated at $50 billion annually. The Wall Street Journal had reported on this project last week as the biggest breakthrough in the pharmaceutical industry this year. The research and development team led by Amy had succeeded in developing an innovative treatment for intractable cancers. Outstanding achievement, Vice President Robert nodded with satisfaction. Your leadership has become the talk of the industry. Looking around the boardroom, several female executives could now be seen among what was once an all-male board. Amy's presence had become a symbol of many changes. After the meeting, Amy returned to her office. Today's newspaper lay on her desk. Reading the article, Amy reflected on the events of a year ago. The incident at the wedding had created ripples far beyond a mere scandal, sending significant waves through society. "Amy," Carol quietly entered the office. "Don't forget about our lunch appointment." "Of course not," Amy smiled and stood up. Her pearl necklace gleamed at her throat. At a high-end restaurant's terrace, mother and daughter gazed at the city's bustle while talking. A letter came from Patricia. Carol took out an envelope. "Would you like to read it?" Amy nodded quietly and opened the letter. "Dear Amy, since that day, I have thought about and learned many things. Through volunteer work at a nursing home, I've come to understand that a person's worth lies not in their titles or status, but in their humanity. I am now deeply ashamed of how my foolish prejudices and arrogance have hurt so many people. James has started working in sales from scratch at a branch office in a regional city. He too seems to be spending his days confronting his own weaknesses. Your decision imposed a harsh trial on our family, but perhaps it was the awakening we needed. While we lost much this past year, what we gained was even more precious. I no longer need titles or luxury. I feel I finally understand the importance of living rightly as a human being. Please forgive me. And thank you. Patricia Carter." Quite a sincere letter. Carol studied her daughter's expression. Amy nodded quietly. Real change sometimes requires pain. Through the restaurant window, they could see the bustle of Harvard Square. Young women walked with confident steps between campus and businesses. "I gave a lecture at Harvard Business School last week," Amy said, picking up her wine glass. The female student's eyes were so bright. "You've become their role model," Carol gazed proudly at her daughter. That night, Amy stood on her home terrace, looking out at Boston's night view. The city lights reflected on the Charles River's surface rippled gently. Messages kept arriving on her smartphone. Cooperation proposals from pharmaceutical companies worldwide, interview requests from business magazines, speaking invitations from women executives associations. Amy Brown had become one of the most watched figures in the business world. But her heart was already set on the next goal: developing innovative medical technologies, nurturing more female researchers, and fundamental transformation of corporate culture. There was still so much to do. A knock sounded at the terrace door. It was her father, Robert. "Ready for tomorrow's board meeting?" "Yes, I have a proposal for a new project," Amy answered without taking her eyes off the night view. "The future you're aiming for seems clear now," Robert gazed proudly at his daughter's profile. "Yes. But it's only just begun," Amy smiled quietly. "Real transformation takes time." The evening breeze gently caressed her hair. Her pearl necklace gleamed softly in the moonlight. It had now become a symbol of her conviction and strength. The next morning's front page would carry articles about Amy's new challenge. Brown Pharmaceuticals revolutionizes industry with breakthrough drug. Next generation leader Amy Brown, the person behind the success. Female executive who broke through prejudice continues to challenge. In her interview, Amy had said, "If our generation doesn't change, the next generation will face the same problems." Transformation sometimes involves pain, but it's a necessary process. Society is definitely changing now. And making that change permanent is the responsibility of each one of us. A new sun rises over Boston. It seemed to herald the dawn of a new era, freed from old values. Amy Brown's story continues to light a beacon of hope in many people's hearts. And that light continues to spread, quietly but surely, even now. Lured by the spring weather, smoke rises slowly from the backyard barbecue grill toward the blue sky. Cherry blossom petals dance in the gentle breeze as if nature itself is blessing our gathering. It's been 3 years since we moved into this house, and our weekends in this quiet Boston suburb are always wrapped in peaceful happiness. In the yard enclosed by white picket fences, I was spreading the tablecloth with practiced hands. The table was adorned with colorful salad bowls and appetizer plates, while pale pink petals occasionally drifted down from the double-flowered cherry tree planted in the corner of the garden. "Melissa, is this sauce okay?" my husband James called out as he emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron. His kind eyes sparkled behind his black-rimmed glasses. His commitment to spending every weekend with family creates the stable happiness in this home. "Yes, it's perfect. Now we just need to wait for your parents," I replied while setting the last plate on the garden table. On the lawn, Amy was playing hide-and-seek with the neighborhood kids. Her golden braids sparkled in the spring sunshine as her laughter echoed throughout the garden. In her princess pink dress, she looked just like a spring fairy. "Mama, look!" I couldn't help but smile as Amy chased after a large butterfly. Her innocent smile was our family's greatest treasure. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there stood William in his expensive suit and Carol in her pastel blue dress. "We've been waiting for you," I called out, and William gave a gentlemanly smile while Carol warmly embraced me. My relationship with my in-laws was something I took pride in. "Amy, Grandpa and Grandma are here." Responding to my voice, Amy waved goodbye to her friends and came running over. Her steps were light, bouncing like the spring breeze. "Grandpa, Grandma." Amy spread her arms wide and hugged her grandparents. Her gesture was as natural and lovely as a butterfly landing on a flower. William gently patted his granddaughter's head, and Carol planted a small kiss on her cheek. As the scent of barbecue mingled with the cherry blossoms, William headed to the garden to help with the grill, and Carol went to the kitchen to help with the final touches on the salad. And so began our weekend gathering. Thin clouds drifted across the sky as a gentle breeze caressed our cheeks. The savory aroma of James's grilled meat wafted through the garden as Amy ran around the table with her friends. Carol chatted with me about the garden flowers, her gentle smile reflecting her kindness as a former elementary school teacher. As the meal progressed, the conversation naturally turned to Amy's birthday present. "Actually, I've prepared something special," William said with a mysterious smile. When Carol took out a large paper bag, Amy's eyes lit up. At that moment, I sensed something different in my father-in-law's expression, but that unease soon dissolved into the family's smiles. "Amy, this is a special present from Grandma and Grandpa." Carol's voice was filled with deep affection. At her words, Amy excitedly clapped her small hands. From the paper bag emerged an adorable teddy bear with fine white and brown fur. "Wow! I've never seen such a cute teddy bear," Amy exclaimed, hugging the stuffed animal preciously. Her expression in that moment was the very picture of pure joy. "Father, Mother, thank you for such a wonderful present," I said with heartfelt gratitude. William nodded with satisfaction, saying quietly, "Seeing this child's smile is my greatest pleasure." At that time, I had no way of knowing the hidden meaning behind those words. At dusk, cherry blossom petals fell silently in the cleaned-up garden. Amy clutched her new teddy bear preciously while excitedly recounting the day's events. The soft light characteristic of spring twilight gently enveloped our family. Everyone thought it was the perfect end to a weekend. While clearing the table, I watched my in-laws' departing backs. William walked with dignity, and Carol cast a final glance at the garden flowers. The scene was the very picture of a peaceful, ideal family. What broke the midnight silence was a faint sound. At first, with my drowsy mind, I thought it was just the house settling. But the next moment, my consciousness snapped awake at the small voice coming from Amy's room. "Mama! Mama!" Next to me, James was breathing quietly in his sleep. I quickly put on my robe and headed to Amy's room. Moonlight streamed through the hallway window. When I opened Amy's door, she had an anxious expression on her princess bed. The moonlight reflecting off the pastel pink wallpaper created a dreamlike atmosphere. "What's wrong, Amy?" As I approached, Amy clutched the teddy bear from her grandparents tightly and said in a trembling voice, "Mama, I'm scared. The bear is making strange noises." I sat down beside my daughter and gently stroked her hair. "It's all right, Mama will check it for you." Taking the teddy bear, I could definitely feel something was off. When hugged, there was a faint mechanical sound from inside. It was a sound that should never come from a normal stuffed animal. "James," I went back to wake my husband. Though he rubbed his sleepy eyes, he immediately understood the situation. The next morning, after sending Amy off to school, I took the teddy bear to an upscale department store downtown. In the stuffed animals section, I approached a young female clerk. "Excuse me, I recently purchased this teddy bear." The clerk carefully examined the item, but her expression showed confusion. "I'm sorry, but we don't carry this product." "But surely this tag." Looking at the tag I pointed to, the clerk's confusion deepened. "This tag seems different. It's slightly different from our official products." Anxiety began to grow in my chest. On my way home, I decided to stop by a reputable local toy repair shop. Though it had an old sign, the skilled technician handled the situation carefully. "Let me check the inside." The white-haired technician began examining the teddy bear carefully on his workbench. His handling showed decades of experience. However, the moment he opened the seam on the back, his hands visibly trembled. "Ma'am, this is..." The technician's voice trailed off. On the workbench lay exposed a sophisticated small camera and high-performance microphone. They were clearly professional surveillance devices. "You should report this to the police immediately," the technician's voice was dead serious. "These are devices that aren't available in normal markets." Various thoughts raced through my mind. Who would do this, and for what purpose? The fact that such surveillance devices had been planted in Amy's bedroom made me feel intensely nauseous. "I'll contact the police." My voice sounded surprisingly calm, even to myself. But inside, anger and fear were swirling. My hand trembled slightly as I took out my smartphone. Within 30 minutes of reporting to the police, 2 detectives arrived. A seasoned older male detective and a young female detective. They began examining the devices inside the teddy bear with professional eyes. "This is a very sophisticated surveillance device," the older detective said. "It's a model that's difficult to obtain in the general market. Could you tell us where you got this?" As I answered that question, a terrible suspicion began growing inside me. Amy's birthday. The present from her grandparents. William's satisfied smile. And that sense of unease I felt then. It was all connected. However, I wasn't yet ready to accept that truth. When Amy came home, I smiled gently at her. "Hey Amy, let's sleep with a different stuffed animal for a while, okay?" Looking at my daughter's innocent smile, I had made up my mind. I had to protect this family, this child. No matter who the opponent might be. The police interrogation room was smaller than I had imagined. Gray walls, a square table, and hard chairs. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window made the room's sterile atmosphere even more pronounced. The middle-aged detective began quietly while opening his notebook. Next to him sat the young female detective, keenly observing my expressions. You received this teddy bear as a present for your daughter from your in-laws. My voice was intentionally controlled, devoid of emotion. I needed to convey the facts as objectively as possible. It was also a way to protect my own heart. Mrs. Watson, the female detective said in a calm voice. About this surveillance equipment, it's a very special product. It's not something available in the general market, mainly used by corporations or special agencies. Those words sent a chill down my spine. The weight of the term special agencies spoke to the gravity of the situation. Actually, there are very few vendors who can handle this type of equipment, the middle-aged detective continued. Currently, we're investigating the purchase route, but... His words were interrupted by a knock on the interrogation room door. It seemed new information had arrived. The detectives temporarily left their seats, leaving me alone in the silence. Outside the window, cherry blossom petals danced in the wind. The spring scenery that had seemed so beautiful just days ago now stirred up an eerie anxiety. Sorry to keep you waiting. The detective's expression had clearly changed when he returned. Actually, we found the purchase records for this surveillance equipment. It was a very expensive transaction, through specialized import channels. At that moment, my cell phone rang. The display showed Carol. It was a call from my mother-in-law. Excuse me, I hung up the phone. However, a message arrived immediately after. Melissa, please listen. I didn't know anything. The police came to the house and asked various questions, but I really have no idea about any of this. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room seemed painfully bright. Mrs. Watson, the middle-aged detective, began carefully choosing his words. According to Carol's testimony, everything regarding the purchase of this teddy bear was arranged by your husband, that is, by William. Those words definitively changed something inside me. In my memory, my father-in-law's smile began to take on an ominous shadow. After leaving the police station, I headed straight to the hospital. I had received word that Carol had been urgently admitted due to excessive stress. Entering the hospital room, the former intelligent teacher's presence was gone, replaced by a frail elderly woman lying there. Her pastel blue hospital gown made her pale complexion stand out even more. Melissa. Carol looked at me with tearful eyes. Please believe me. I really didn't. I understand, I held my mother-in-law's hand. It was ice cold. You didn't know anything about this, did you? Carol nodded quietly and began to cry. But the police suspect me. The neighbors too. Her words were interrupted by sobs. The setting sun streaming through the hospital window cast deep shadows. That evening, a chance encounter with the neighbor at the supermarket complicated the situation further. Oh, Melissa, she hesitantly approached me. It must be difficult with Carol's situation. But you know, she was always unusually obsessed with her grandchild. I was concerned about how she was always watching through the window. I wanted to object to those words, but at that moment, William strode confidently through the supermarket's automatic doors. Still in his expensive suit. That gentlemanly smile, as if nothing had happened. When our eyes met, his smile seemed to freeze for an instant. However, he quickly recovered and gave an elegant bow. Melissa, how is Carol doing? His voice carried the same gentle tone as always. But something lurking beneath it sent chills down my spine. Father. I answered while carefully choosing my words. She's getting some rest. I see, William nodded deeply. I'll take responsibility for Carol. By the way, how is Amy? Something about the way he said Amy filled me with instinctive fear. That night, when I returned home, James was holding his head in his study. I'll have to take time off work, he said in a tired voice. The police questioning is likely to be lengthy. James. Father, that father would do such a thing. His voice trembled. Why? For what purpose? I placed my hand on my husband's shoulder. Outside the window, the full moon cast an eerie light. In Amy's room, our daughter was sleeping peacefully, hugging her new stuffed animal. The next morning's front page headline read, "Surveillance Device Scandal Shakes Distinguished Investment Family." While the article avoided stating the facts directly, it suggested the darkness lurking within upper-class households. I threw the newspaper in the trash. I had to protect my daughter from this turmoil. And simultaneously, another anxiety crossed my mind. Could this be just the tip of the iceberg? Could there be a deeper, more terrifying truth hidden behind my father-in-law's actions? The phone call from the police came right after that. We found new evidence. The detective's voice had lost its usual calm. Could you come to the station immediately? I took a deep breath. The door to the truth was about to open. Upon arriving at the police station, there was a different tension in the air. As I passed through reception, I could feel the police officers' gazes focused on me. Something was happening. Something big. We've been waiting for you, the detective's voice who came to meet me carried weight. I'll escort you to the chief's office. The chief's office, those words alone told of the seriousness of the situation. Opening the heavy wooden door, a middle-aged police chief greeted me with a solemn expression. Familiar documents were spread across his desk. Mrs. Watson, the chief began. First, please look at this. The screen displayed security camera footage from a luxury hotel. There was William, in his expensive suit, clearly shown making a transaction with an unknown man. The date was 1 week before the teddy bear purchase. This isn't all, a young detective spread out new materials. Communication records from the past 3 years, bank transaction histories, and the mounting evidence showed this wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, but a long-term, calculated act. Suspect William Watson is already in custody. Those words sank heavily into the air. My father-in-law in the interrogation room had lost his usual dignity. Worn down by detention center life, a frail old man sat in the defendant's seat. However, his eyes still held that strange gleam. "Melissa," he began speaking in a calm tone as soon as he saw me. "Some may condemn my actions. But this is all love." That word, love, made me shiver. "Amy is my masterpiece." William's expression became almost rapturous. "Every single move she makes, everything is precious, valuable data." "Data," my voice trembled. "Yes, data," he continued as if in a fever. "I'm recording everything about her growth. Her smiles, tears, stumbles, successes. I'm creating perfect observation records. Isn't this true love?" At that moment, I understood. The person before me wasn't my gentlemanly father-in-law. He was an obsessed observer, possessed by the need to control. "Are there other devices?" I asked fearfully. William gave a cunning smile. "Well, who knows? Why don't you try to find them?" The next moment, his expression suddenly changed, and he slammed the table hard. "I have every right. That child's entire life belongs to me." The interrogation room door opened, and several police officers rushed in. Among the chaos, I heard my father-in-law's shouts. "I'm not wrong. This is true love." That afternoon, there was a meeting with a psychiatrist. After a long examination, the doctor gave his diagnosis with a grave expression. He shows severe controlling personality disorder combined with delusional attachment disorder. Particularly notable is his abnormal fixation on observation. The diagnosis report contained even more shocking facts. There were signs that my father-in-law had repeated similar actions in the past. Carol, hospitalized, deteriorated further after learning this truth. I should have noticed. She gripped my hand while crying. That night, I spent a long time watching Amy's sleeping face for the first time in a while. Watching my daughter's innocent breathing, the events of the past played through my mind like a film reel. Suddenly, Amy woke up. "Mama, when is Grandpa coming?" That innocent question squeezed my heart. How should I explain? How could I protect this pure heart? The next day, there was another report from the police. They said they found massive amounts of data and records at my father-in-law's home. Videos, audio recordings, and diary-like records documenting Amy's life. They were evidence of an obsessive fixation that bordered on madness. Unfortunately, this might be just the tip of the iceberg. The detective carefully chose his words. There might be other victims. Those words made me feel nauseous. My father-in-law's madness might have gone far beyond what we could imagine. James sat silently at his computer, immersed in work. Perhaps this was his way of averting his eyes from reality. "Melissa," he suddenly turned and said. "Let's move. Sell this house and start in a new place." That suggestion represented the possibility of a new beginning. But at the same time, it spoke to the depth of the wounds we now carried. As I left the police station, the evening sky was stained deep red. As if all the events until now were burning away. On the way home, I pulled over to the shoulder and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. The tears wouldn't stop. Anger, sadness, and above all, anxiety about what lay ahead came crashing over me. However, remembering Amy's smile, I took a deep breath. This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. The day of the verdict. The 3-month battle in court was finally coming to an end. Entering the courtroom, I saw William. Gone was his dignified appearance. A thin old man worn down by life in detention sat in the defendant's seat. Yet his eyes still held that strange gleam. Defendant William Watson, the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. 10 years imprisonment, with 3 years to be served in a psychiatric treatment facility. As the sentence was pronounced, I held James's hand tightly. I could feel my husband's fingers trembling slightly. The defendant's actions inflicted deep psychological trauma on the young victim and her family. Particularly, the fact that this was a premeditated crime exploiting a relationship of trust must be severely condemned. As the judge continued speaking, William suddenly stood up and shouted, "I'm not wrong. This is love. Pure love." Watching his back as he was led away, I was filled with complex emotions. Hatred, anger, or pity. I couldn't find the answer. As we left the courthouse, the media swarmed us. Avoiding camera flashes, we hurried to our car. From that day, our new life began. We left Boston and moved to a small town in the suburbs. A white house with a green roof. In the yard, we installed a swing set that Amy chose. In this new environment, we slowly began to heal. Mama, look. Amy chases butterflies in the garden. Her smile is as bright as ever. I've been saved many times by children's resilient ability to recover. We now meet Carol once a month. She's gradually recovering from her psychological damage and now runs a small gardening class. It seems the flowers are healing her wounded heart. Melissa, Carol said quietly one day while tending to the garden flower bed. I didn't notice for a long time either. William's true nature. Her voice held a mixture of regret and resignation. But the former self-blame was no longer there. Perhaps this was her own form of acceptance. Amy quickly adjusted to her new school. We explained the situation to her teacher and asked for special consideration. "I'll keep a watchful eye on your child," the teacher promised with a kind smile that gave me peace of mind. We all continue with psychological counseling as a family. Overcoming trauma takes time, the counselor says. But your family's bond is very strong. James started working at a new company. I want to live a different life than my father, his determination was firm. He always spends weekends with family, cherishing his time with Amy. However, complete healing is still a long way off. Amy still wakes from frightening dreams at night. I myself am still struck by sudden anxiety. Still, we're moving forward one step at a time. Letters occasionally arrive from William at the psychiatric hospital. However, we return them unopened. Let's put an end to this. This was our family decision. One weekend afternoon, Amy, hugging her new stuffed animal, asked curiously, "Mama, why was Grandpa always watching me?" Her innocent question momentarily left me speechless. But I quickly answered gently, that was Grandpa's wrong way of showing love. Amy thought for a moment, then smiled brightly. But Mama and Papa's way of loving is right, isn't it? Those words brought tears to my eyes. In my daughter's innocent smile, I felt I saw hope for our future. Time flows, seasons change, and scars gradually fade. However, this experience remains etched in us as an indelible lesson. What is love? What is trust? What are family bonds? As we search for answers to these questions, we weave our new days together, one step at a time.